refugees coming to Britain, and even turning its back on unaccompanied children. Last April, the government agreed, after much persuasion from the House of Lords, to accept the Dubs Amendment to the Immigration Act 2016, which would allow a number of unaccompanied children already in Europe to come to the UK. And that number was decided upon after consultation with local authorities, but it was widely expected to be in the region of about 3,000. That 3,000 represented our fair share of the unaccompanied children in France, Greece and Italy, as estimated by Save the Children. These are vulnerable children. Europol had stated that of the 90,000 estimated minors in Europe, 10,000 had gone missing in Europe, with evidence suggesting that some had fallen into the hands of child traffickers and sexual exploitation was taking place. So it is for me a matter of shame that this government announced last month that it is backsliding from its legal commitment under the Dubs Amendment and unilaterally declaring that it will cap the number at 350. And I can tell you that they will be challenged on this in the courts. Thanks to Citizens UK and Help Refugees. What the government is in effect saying is that local authorities have reached the end of the road and are no longer able to offer sanctuary to these children, and that the British public's generosity too has been exhausted. And that is just not so. There are hundreds of spaces still available specifically for Dubs children. Let me give you some examples, and all these figures are based on responses to freedom of information requests from individual councils all during the month of February 2017 and were gathered by Safe Passages, who are part of Citizens UK. This is just a flavour. Glasgow, they offered 35, they've received 19, 16 places. Lewisham offered 23, received 1, 22 places. Sutton offered 10, received 7, 3 places. Bristol offered 10, received none. And this is one I particularly like. East Sussex, they have space for 72 children and currently have received 24. And this includes Amber Rudd's constituency. And I could go on. Birmingham City, 73, etc. There are hundreds. This Tory government should hang its head in shame, because the fact is that unless the government acts, these children in despair take fate into their own hands and risk using smugglers or trying to come to the UK on the backs of lorries. 5 children are now known to have died trying to cross from Calais to the UK over this last year. 4 had family here in the UK that they were trying to reunite with, and the 5th died on the motorway last week in Lille after trying to climb into a lorry. He was eligible to come to the UK under the Dubs scheme. Conference, the fact is that more and more children are returning to Calais, and surrounding camps such as Dunkirk grow on a daily basis because these children have nowhere else to go. Conference, we can't do much to help the children of Aleppo escape their desperate plight, but surely once they arrive on our doorstep in northern France, we can treat them with humanity and some dignity. Theresa May and Amber Rudd will have us believe that the goodwill of the British people has been exhausted, but I say to them that the British people are better than that. Amber Rudd says that giving sanctuary is acting as a pull factor. So let me quote from a report from the Lords EU Select Committee on Home Affairs published last July. And it states, "We are dealing with push factors rather than pull factors. Push factors of war, terrorism, extreme poverty, and others, and there is evidence for this." The report then goes on to demolish another myth, the theory that allowing unaccompanied children to be reunited with their parents is a pull factor, and it states that, instead, the evidence shows that some children are reluctant to seek family reunification for fear that it may place family members in danger. Conference, there is no evidence that pull factors are at work here. Conference, I'd like to end by saying that this mass movement of people that we are seeing, the largest mass movement of people in Europe since the Second World War, is a challenge that we in the West must rise to help resolve. No one country can provide the answers, but it does need leadership with vision and a commitment to bear our share of the burden. And from the howls of outrage in the tabloids and the appalling rhetoric of people like Katie Hopkins and Nigel Farage, you would think that all of the 65 million people that, according to the UN, have been displaced worldwide are coming to the UK. So I think a reality check is in order. According to the UN, of the 65 million people who are currently displaced, the majority, 2/3, are internally displaced persons. They've had to flee their homes but stay in other regions of their country. And where do the rest go? The fact is that most refugees seek refuge in neighbouring countries, which are more often than not themselves developing countries. For example, the top refugee hosting country is Turkey, 2.8 million, nearly 3 now. Second is Pakistan, 2.1 million, mostly from Afghanistan. Lebanon, tiny Lebanon, is hosting more than 1 million, 20% of its population, putting immense pressure on local resources. Jordan has 700,000. Yes, we are the second largest contributor to the running of the official camps in some of these countries, but many, many more refugees live amongst the population, causing enormous strains in already fragile states. So how does our
Could you draw your remarks to a close, please?
Absolutely. Of the estimated 40-odd thousand unaccompanied children in Europe, how many have we taken? Since the demolition of the Calais camp, we've taken just 200 minors from there, 200 unaccompanied minors. Do you know how many we've taken from Italy? 3. And from Greece at the last count? None. Conference, I ask you to support this motion.
Thank you. Could I ask Adam Hanrahan from Sheffield to stand by? And I now call Bradley Hillier-Smith from Camden. Is Bradley in the hall? Oh.
Conference, take a minute to seriously consider the situation. Innocent children, through no fault of their own, have been forced to flee violence, deprivation, war, and human rights violations. They then find themselves completely on their own, without their parents, in a desperate situation, at significant risk to traffickers, exploitation, and sexual abuse, and they are in urgent need of safeguarding and help. What must we do? We cannot ignore these children. We have a moral duty to provide safety and hope. There is no excuse. Numerous councils have come forward explicitly showing that we have the resources, that we have the capacity to settle refugee children, yet this government refuses. To turn our backs on children in need of help when we could easily do so at little cost to ourselves, and to take in merely 350 when there are nearly 100,000 such children in Europe, is morally indefensible. We saw the welcome outrage at Trump's ban on refugees and his wall, but we must remember that our government is itself building walls in Calais and closing its doors to refugees. The closure scheme is a betrayal of these vulnerable children, condemning them to unthinkable dangers, and we must all not be afraid to call it out for what it is, a ban on refugee children. Now, Conference, I think it's absolutely vital that we must not let anti-migration hate and anti-refugee policies to become normalised. We must not be intimidated to concede to let this issue and these children slip through our fingers. We should be outspoken and bold, and that is why I think that though this motion is essential and should be passed, it does not go far enough. We should have the confidence to demand not only that the transfer of children under the DUB scheme be restarted immediately, but also to demand that the scheme be expanded and that the UK should take in at least, as was called for by the original DUBS amendment, to take in 3,000 refugee children. That is our moral duty. And to the amazing Lib Dems working tirelessly on this into the House of Lords and in the House of Commons, keep up the pressure because we are all behind you, and so is all of history and morality. We should therefore be bold and have the courage and conviction to shout it loud and clear that the UK must fulfil its moral duties to these children and that refugees are indeed welcome here. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Suzanne Fletcher from Stockton to stand by, please? And I now call Adam Hanrahan from Sheffield, who is a first-time speaker.
Thank you, Conference. This time last year, I was in Lesvos for a field class. I'm a recent geography graduate, and we'd gone there to talk about island economies. Once we got there, it was abundantly clear that the minor issues that Lesvos faces by dint of it being an island economy was absolutely dwarfed by the humanitarian crisis that was ongoing on that island. From Lesvos, you can see Turkey, you can see the country which has taken in almost 3 million refugees. And some of the things I saw there were absolutely harrowing. Seeing people penned in behind fences because they had fled some of the most horrendous experiences on this planet was deeply distressing to me and my fellow students. And when I got back to Britain, I was reminded of just how lucky we are in this country to not face those absolutely horrendous experiences, how lucky we are to live in a civilized, well-respected country where our civil liberties are respected on the whole, except, of course, when we have Labour governments. But in all seriousness, Conference, it is imperative that the DUB scheme is reopened. 3,000 refugee children. That's 5 for each of the new 600 boundaries that have been produced by the Boundary Commission, 5 for each new constituency. It's not so large a number. It's 5 for every 73,000 people in this country. And I know that when I go out in my ward and talk to the regular folk out there, they don't see child refugees and think people are swarming here. They don't hear what the Daily Mail or Nigel Farage or Katie Hopkins says. What they see are children who desperately need our help. The words behind me say open, tolerant and united. That cannot just stand for our party, as true as it is. It has to stand for our country too. And it is our party that has to lead the way on that. And it is only our party which can lead the way on that. When it comes to child refugees, when I was in Lesvos, what I saw was a bright orange mountain of life jackets atop a green hill. Now, some of those life jackets were tiny, and it is clear that the parents of those refugee children had done what any parents would do. They had bought their children what they thought were life jackets. What we were shown was that most of them did not work. They had been wrapped around bricks and thrown into the sea, and about 90% of them sunk. They absorbed the water, they didn't float. And it's horrendous, the trafficking, the fact that people try and earn money out of these people's horrendous experiences. And Conference, when I was in Lesvos and when I was seeing these terrible things, I was struck by a quote from the film Paddington, where it said that a long time ago, the people of England sent their children with labels round their necks to be taken care of by strangers in the countryside where it was safe. And I think it is imperative that we as a party and we as a country remember how to treat those strangers who now come to us where it is safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Joss Creswell from West Dorset to stand by? And I now call Suzanne Fletcher from Stockton.
Good morning, Conference. This is a call to action. You've heard what the situation is, you've heard how bad it is, and you're hearing what Liberal Democrats think about it. And obviously, we're telling the government they've got to act. But the idea isn't that you go home. You feel quite smug and happy that we've debated this, that we've agreed it, probably unanimously. You need to go home and act. You need to get hold of your MP. The usual methods, but you can email, letter, surgery, and tell them how important it is that they take action too. Maybe you're